Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Grace Harbor and Willapa Bay forecast meeting this evening. We're really happy that you've joined us tonight, and we're just going to stand by for a minute or two while we make sure that everybody has joined us. Thank you.
Okay, it looks like our participants have leveled off. I will just start with a brief overview of our guidelines and etiquette for our public meetings. Upon joining the virtual meeting, your microphone will be muted automatically. In case of any technical issues during the meeting, notify us in the chat and we will help you. Please note that the chat will only be monitored for technical assistance. Public comments are welcome, and we'll be rotated between person and virtual attendees, but we're virtual tonight, so we will go just straight through our questions. To ask a question or make a comment, please use your device's raise hand feature. If on the phone, dial *9 on Zoom. And if using a computer, click the hand reaction icon at the bottom of your screen. During the comment period, the host will enable you to unmute yourself. You can then unmute yourself by pressing the mute button on your device or *6 on your phone. Keep the discussions focused on the agenda items and questions at hand. Offensive, disrespectful, or derogatory language, including profanity, personal attacks, threats, or insults towards individuals, governments, or organizations, is strictly prohibited. Assume positive intentions from those speaking and listen respectfully. To assume a balanced discussion, limit your comments to 2 minutes with one clarifying follow-up question. Provide constructive feedback regarding the fisheries in which you participate. Remember that the most compelling comments are those that pertain to the topics under discussion. WDFW staff may close public comment to stay on schedule with the agenda or to provide others who still need to comment with an opportunity to speak. These meetings will be recorded and posted online as soon as possible, probably by the end of the close of business tomorrow. If you have further questions or comments, please submit them in written format on our public comment webpage listed below. Thanks, Marlene.
Thank you, Leah. Next slide, please. So again, welcome everybody. We're really happy to have you here for the 2024 North of Falcon season. And tonight we're going to go over our Willapa and Grace Harbor forecasts. Next slide, please. So tonight we'll start off with some staff introductions and the meeting purpose. We'll move through the North of Falcon process and the Administrative Procedure Act. And then we'll get to the good stuff, which is our 2024 forecasts and management objectives for Willapa Bay, Grace Harbor, and Queets and Quinault Rivers. Next slide. So here's our staff introductions. This is sort of how we are organized on this bigger team. Over on the left, we have the statewide salmon management team with Kyle Addix heading it up, our intergovernmental salmon manager. A lot of these people are here today, so when you hear your name called, feel free to turn on your camera and wave hello. Working alongside Kyle is Mark Baltzell, our state salmon and steelhead manager. And then there's me, Marlene Wagner, your South Coast Fishery Policy Lead. And I work closely with Barb McClellan, who is our Willapa Bay, Grace Harbor Commercial and Marine Recreational Biologist. Over in Region 6, we have James Losey as our Region 6 Fish Program Manager. And working alongside him are Mike Scharf, the Grace Harbor Fish Biologist. And we have a new Willapa Bay Fish Biologist, Aaron Whitcup. Working with Mike in Grace Harbor is Kurt Holt, the Grace Harbor area biologist, and Kim Figler Barnes, also Grace Harbor area biologist. And then working alongside Aaron is Nick Van Buskirk, the Willapa Bay area biologist. Next slide, please. So tonight, our purpose really here is to introduce the 2024 North of Falcon process, provide information for public input, answer questions about the information and the data, and then hear from you with your initial fishery suggestions for the 2024 salmon season. Next slide, please. So we'll start by going over the North of Falcon Process and Administrative Procedure Act. North of Falcon is the annual cooperative process to set salmon seasons in Washington waters. The name refers to waters north of Oregon's Cape Falcon, which marks the southern border of Washington's management of salmon stocks. And it's just one component of a larger salmon setting process that also involves the state, tribal governments, federal regulators, and other US states, as well as Canada. So there's a lot of things that guide North of Falcon. It's a big process that involves a lot of people, and fishery managers must weigh many factors when developing salmon seasons, and these include, but are not limited to, the Endangered Species Act constraints, Commissioner's policy, Pacific Salmon Treaty obligations, and tribal co-management. So most people here are aware that we co-manage with treaty tribes to manage their fisheries. And of course, we work really closely with our co-managers in Quinault. We don't have a terminal area co-manager in Willapa Bay, but we do negotiate our ocean Willapa Bay fisheries. And we also deal with extensive monitoring and evaluation of fisheries statewide. Next slide, please. So here's our kind of a breakdown of our public meeting schedule that may be of interest to the South Coast region. So we're here tonight, this evening. Currently, we're in the joint Grace Harbor and Willapa Bay kickoff forecast meeting. This Friday on March 1st, we have the statewide salmon forecast meeting beginning at 9 a.m. on the Capitol campus. There's going to be a lot of detailed information about ocean conditions there, and so definitely tune in if that's of interest to you. We'll present Puget Sound, coastal Washington, and Columbia River salmon forecasts and fishery management objectives. So there's a number of ways to participate here. It's going to be live streamed on TVW. You can register to be a participant on Zoom, or you may show up in person. Next on the agenda is the first of this year's Pacific Fishery Management Council meetings from March 6th to the 11th. On March 13th, there will be a discussion of management objectives and preliminary fishery proposals for sport and commercial fisheries in coastal Washington and Puget Sound, and also some discussion of Columbia River and ocean fisheries. Next slide, please. The second North of Falcon meeting is going to be on March 27th, which is going to be focused on developing fisheries further and narrowing down what Washington fisheries might look like. After that, we'll meet again for a North of Falcon, Willapa Bay, and Grace Harbor fisheries discussion meeting on March 28th. We're going to have more detailed information then about what fisheries might look like with our ocean options and to begin narrowing down on our terminal options. From April 6th to the 11th, there's the second Pacific Fishery Management Council meeting where the council narrows down ocean options and we get a proposed fishery package and start to move through the formal rulemaking or Administrative Procedure Act process. We're going to follow that up on April 16th, where we will reconvene here to provide final draft fishery packages for both Willapa Bay and Grace Harbor. So all the links are clickable here, and the entire schedule for the rest of the meetings that are being held statewide can be accessed at the link at the bottom here. So for rulemaking, it really goes through what we call this Administrative Procedure Act process. So as we close in on fishing seasons and regulations for the upcoming year, we also go through the APA. The process this year actually started back in January when we filed a CR 101, which is a code revisor form for the public that we are about to start rulemaking. The specific coastal, commercial, and Willapa Bay, Grace Harbor recreational CR 101s were filed on January 19th. So after that, the process is relatively straightforward. After a minimum of 45 days, we can file a CR 102, which is the actual proposed rules we are considering adopting. At this point, after a minimum of 35 days, we have a public hearing and accept written comments on the proposed rules. We consider making modifications to the proposed rules based on comments received or errors identified in the proposed rules in the CR 102. And then we move to a CR 103P and concise explanatory statement filing. The CR 103P will be the actual rule that is being adopted, and the director will review and consider adopting it. It's published to the Washington State Register after 14 days, and the rule becomes effective 31 days after the filing of that CR 103P. Next slide, please. So between the CR 101 filing in January and the CR 102 filing later, we have a very large public input process, which is our North Falcon process. This is where we have our long string of meetings that I just discussed, and where we're going to take the majority of the public input and your suggestions. As we move forward filing the proposed regulations in the 102, we'll really have already gone through this big public process so that those rules, so that they are as close to the final rules as they can be. Although we do still take additional comment, and we will have a public hearing to consider changes to those. Next slide, please. And with that, I am going to hand the microphone over to Aaron Whitcup to go over Willapa Bay's 2024 forecasts. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Marlene. It's really my pleasure to be here. As Marlene said in the introductory slide, I started in January, so still really new, but really thankful to have this awesome team here to help me get started. Some of you may know me from living in the community for a few years in Westport, but I'm sure there's many of you on the call that I haven't met yet. And I just want everyone to know that my door is always open for call or email, and working with the public and talking to everyone to hear your perspectives and your comments is really important to me. So I hope you get in touch and have a chance to get to know all of you more over the coming years. So I'll dive right in now to the forecast for 2024. And we have this split up into our forecast for our three major species, Chinook, coho, and chum. And for each species, we have specifically tailored our methods to the life histories of these species. And we incorporate multiple different types of data, the spawning ground numbers that we get back, the marine catch, our survival estimates. So all of this data goes in to create these forecasts. And we have them here broken down into natural origin and hatchery origin forecasts. And our natural origin forecasts are for those fish that are not marked by an adipose fin clipped, and they're not tagged either. And then the hatchery fish are those fish that either have a tag or have an adipose fin clip. And then we have here the total for you added up. So a few highlights here are total numbers. The Chinook, we're forecasting a natural origin return of 3,519 fish, which is a bit of an increase from compared to last year, which is around 2,800. And most of these returning fish we predict are going to be in age class 4. For the hatchery Chinook forecast, we're predicting 27,327 returning fish, which is very similar to last year, for a total of 30,846 fish. For coho, we run an ocean age 3 forecast, and we are predicting a natural origin return of 29,512. And we're predicting a hatchery return of 91,536 for a total of 121,048. For chum, then, mainly the chum return is largely a natural origin return, and we're predicting 78,648 fish to return natural origin chum, and only 1,742 hatchery origin chum to return, for a total of 80,390. And on the next few slides, we'll compare this data to previous years to get a better feel for trends. Next slide, please. So I'll take a minute to explain how the data is displayed here, because most of the rest of the presentation uses the same data format. You can see on the y-axis, we're showing the number of Chinook in the thousands. And on the x-axis, we have the years from 2010 to 2024. And the years 2010 to 2023, that's all data that we observed and are plotting here. And 2024 is our forecast for the upcoming year. And the way you read this plot is the total height of the bar. So the dark green and the light green combined, that's the total run size with hatchery and origin added, natural origin added together. So the reason we like to show it like this, because you can use the colors and the stack bars to evaluate trends over time and track it with your eye easily. And you can see the natural origin Chinooks have been relatively stable since 2010. Hatchery have gone up and down more, but for this upcoming year, we are predicting a larger return of Chinook for the natural origin fish and similar levels for the hatchery origin fish, 27,327. Next slide, please. Here we're showing the same graph, but for coho run size instead. So again, we've got the historical data from 2010 to 2023, and then the 2024 forecast. We have in the dark orange our natural origin fish, and the light orange the hatchery origin fish, predicting a similar run size in 2024 for natural origin as we saw in 2023, but an increased hatchery origin return. You can see the size of the orange section for 2024 is increased compared to last year. Next slide, please. So this is the last species we're going to talk about for the Willapa Bay return, and showing the graph in the same format where the dark purple is the natural origin fish and the light purple are the hatchery origin fish. And we are showing that the chum, the natural origin chum, is the large component of this return. And there's a slight increase in our hatchery origin chum returning for this year. So yeah, looking forward to hearing any questions you may have at the end of the presentation. And this is the main section I wanted to talk about for the Willapa Bay. So pass it on to the Grays Harbor folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. That was wonderful. You did a very good job at describing things, so I don't have to. So with that, I'll just move right along. Spring Chinook forecast has not been finalized at this point. We're still working with the Chehalis tribe and the Quinault tribe to make sure all the data are put together, and we have a forecast that we can all agree upon. I will say that the forecast is coming off of a couple pretty large brood years, and we expect that the forecast will be probably above the goal. But we'll talk a little bit more in depth a little later on about the potential listing of spring Chinook and coastal Chinook towards the end of the meeting. Our fall Chinook forecast is a little bit reflective of kind of a recent downward trend in the population, 10,601 natural fish and 1,851 hatchery fish. While our coho is reflective of a recent increase in abundance with 67,709 ocean age 3 and 52,940 January ocean age 3 hatchery fish. And just for a quick refresher, this forecast for coho is the abundance, the adult abundance out in the ocean before we start taking fish out in our ocean fisheries. So typically we lose about 7 to 10% of these fish before they cross the bar. So kind of give you an idea of what terminal returns might be, just reduce about 10% of those fish. Next slide, please. Here's just a quick review of our Chehalis Chinook. You can see that there's kind of been a downward trend. I will point out that last year's escapement, 2023, so this last fall, we did not make the escapement goal. And also wanted to point out that even without fisheries, we would not have made the escapement goal. So the total run size was below the goal. It was about 7,800. So the forecast is a little bit reflective of this kind of recent downward trend. Next slide. Kind of on an up note, our coho, after our 6-year small numbers, we're seeing a rebound. Sorry, there is no 2023 number there yet. We're still out counting coho in our spawning ground surveys. But what I will say is that if we look at the indexes that we have out there where we're counting coho on an almost weekly basis, and look at how those relate to past years, it looks like we're probably going to be around 40,000 escapement into the Chehalis Basin for our coho. Next slide. For the Huck tulips, again, fall Chinook, we seem to be in a little bit of a downward trend, so our forecasts are reflecting that. 37.28 naturals and 34.62 hatchery fish coming back to the Hump Tulips Basin. Coho, again, these are ocean abundance forecasts. 4,068 naturals, which is below the goal before they even cross the bar, and about 12,000 hatchery fish. And then our chum, this is again a reflection of an upward trend in the population, 67,308 natural fish. And then we have a small hatchery component where we're forecasting about 2,000 fish coming back. So a quick review of their trends. As you can see, again, 2023 wasn't the greatest year for our Chinook returns. Our natural spawners in Hump tulips did not achieve the escapement goal. So a little bit of a concern, but we do have a forecast that is a little bit above the goal. For the coho, there's kind of a shiny moment there. It's pretty small, but in 2022, we actually made the escapement goal for the first time in a long time. And again, 2023, another decent return, but I don't think we're going to make the escapement goal in the Hump tulips with our natural spawners. So a little bit of a nice bump in population there in the Hump tulips for our coho. So kind of nice to see. And then the final one, our chum. It's really nice to see this nice increase in chum. I wish I could explain why it's happening, but we can thank the ocean and some habitat conditions for that. I will point out, now I kind of want to get into this a little bit, the forecast is a little lower than the last couple of years' return. In chum and in Chinook, we saw that the 3-year-old component this last year was proportionally a little lower than we typically see. And there was a lot of relationships between siblings within these stocks. So it might give us an idea of what 4-year-olds might, the size of the 4-year-olds coming back. And that's kind of reflective in this forecast. And a little bit also in the Chinook forecasts. So kind of a little red flag that we saw with fewer 3-year-olds coming back this past return than typical. So just kind of pointing that out a little bit as we move forward. Next slide. Oh, and we always give you a little bit of idea what the Queets Quinault coho looks like. The Quinault River has been a fairly steady producer of coho. Both the forecasts are fairly normal. Queets is a little bit up. That's a good sign. Queets historically has been a driver of fisheries out in the ocean, but with these forecasts, that's not going to be an issue. But 15,780 or 95 naturals is a decent number. I will caution everybody out there that what might drive the Queet system this fall will be the fall Chinook forecast, which is pretty low. And I think, let's move on. A little bit of the trend again. We don't have the escapement estimates for 2023 in either Queets or the Quinault River, so we're not going to have a number there. Again, though, early signs indicate that decent numbers of coho returned in 2023, similar to what we saw in the Chehalis Basin, but fairly steady trend in Quinault coho populations. And next slide. Very similar in the Queets. Actually, the Queets is kind of up and down, but been performing a little nicer in the last few years. So I think I got one more slide to talk about. So what we're looking at as we start this North of Falcon process, we're getting a better idea of what the numbers are for fish out there. Some of the management objectives that we need to keep an eye on, in the Willapa Bay. As always, 20% cap on Chinook impacts. And then the other two, stocks managed to the escapement goal. So, in Chehalis, I'm trying to think of how deep I want to get into the spring Chinook issue. As you're aware, or maybe you're not, there was a petition to list spring Chinook and also coastal Chinook for consideration for listing under the Endangered Species Act. The forecast, which hasn't quite been agreed to, but it's probably going to be above the goal based on the brood returns that we've seen the last few years. I would be very uncomfortable with offering any kind of opportunity on spring Chinook this year, just because of the concern of hybridization, federal listings, and a lot of work that's going on there. Our tulips coho, although we did see a bump in returns 2 years ago, that stock hasn't been producing real well for a long time. So we're looking at having some sort of impact cap on that. And then all our other stocks, forecasts are, some of them are great, some of them are okay. So we would manage those to meet the escapement goals. So those are going to be our management objectives as we move forward and as we hear recommendations from you guys. And with that, I will pass the torch on to James.
Hey, Mike, nice work there. Thanks. Appreciate it. Yeah, I'm going to pop in here just to describe some fishery proposals and ideas we've heard from the public to date and things we're thinking about in-house. I want to remind folks, if you're seeing this slide and you're thinking, I've also got proposals, you're not too late. You're actually early, maybe right on time. We've had some folks over the summer and during last year's winter fisheries tell us things they want. So we just put them on the list here. We expect by the next time we meet for our next public meeting, this list will be longer, we hope. So if you got ideas you want to put on this list, let us know. Specifically, contact Mike Scharf for Chehalis River ideas. And then Erin Whitkop that you just met. She's going to be collecting, along with Nick and others, Willapa Bay ideas. And then if you're focused around commercial fisheries, you know the people leading that work really well, I think, Marlene and Barb McClellan. So just want to flag, we're all listening to your comments. And here's a few we've heard. So in Willapa Bay, we've been thinking about mark selective coho fisheries in places where wild coho populations, naturally produced coho, are not meeting sort of performance metrics. So we may have places where Willapa as a whole, we're meeting total escapement across the basin. But specifically in hatchery rivers, we have places where we could provide added protection for natural origin coho, but not sacrificing any harvest or fish to the creel because of abundant hatchery population. So that's an idea that's being discussed. Each year, if you've been here before, you hear about ideas around snagging and general bad behavior in some of our terminal fisheries. And most of that behavior, those challenges are focused around hatchery racks, so right below hatcheries, where we got abundance of fish, low flow, and a lot of folks eager to take home a salmon. This isn't a Willapa Bay specific issue. If you fish around the state, you've seen these challenges and fish managers struggling with it. But we have a lot of people with big ideas, and specifically in the Nacelle River, but also other places. So here's a few on the list. We've heard some gear restriction ideas that we're listening close. This could include restrictions on jigs, leader length restrictions, other creative solutions to changing gear in a way that could improve behavior. Some folks have talked about area restrictions. So you've seen places in Hood Canal and maybe other places where we allow bait under a bobber only in some locations, or some other restriction that may improve behavior. And then maybe a more creative idea, something we haven't tried before, are specific retention rules. So we could sort of heighten the sensitivity around snagging. Right now, if you hook a fish in the head, you can keep it. So we talk about in front of the gill plate, but that could be, zeroed in closer to fish have to be hooked in the mouth. Maybe that would encourage folks to fish in a way that encourages a fish to bite a hook versus snagging. So that's an idea that we've discussed and heard. But then also, you'll see words here. Marlene, maybe you can even put your cursor over it because there's a lot of info on here. Under retention rules, we have this all landed fish count against your limit. The goal today is just to say it out loud and folks can think about it and let us know what you think. But you can think about in lake fisheries where we have trout fisheries, we have these rules where the bag limit might be 5, but if you high grade or catch and release fish, those released fish count against your 5 daily limit. So in a place like Willapa Bay terminal rivers, we could have a bag limit of 2 fish or 4 fish, but if you snag a fish, foul hook it, land it, and release it, that could count against your limit. So this is a rule we haven't tried before, to my knowledge, in a river system, but we're discussing a pilot project where we try something like this or any of these creative ideas. So we wanted to just share those and then encourage folks to add to the Willapa Bay list. Yeah, thanks, Marlene. Yeah, so that's that one I just talked about. All landed fish count against the limit. So just ideas for now. In Grays Harbor, all these bullets, there's 3 bullets here. They're all focused around December fisheries. If folks have been involved in steelhead regulations recently, you've seen closures ranging from December 1 to later than that, mid-December, to protect steelhead. We have a lot of folks that come to these meetings, agree to salmon fisheries, help us model those fisheries all the way into December. And then we get to steelhead regulations in November and we go ahead and close those fisheries that were already planned. So that's pretty frustrating, especially folks targeting coho that rarely encounter a steelhead. So we've heard a lot of ideas. One of them could be, we just decide right up front, we're going to close December fisheries for salmon and shift as many of those impacts toward early season fisheries. So the thought is, if we're going to close anyway, let's model that closure. And then the second bullet here says model December open, and then seek agreement on steelhead impacts at North Falcon. So we don't typically talk about steelhead at North Falcon for lots of reasons. We're really focused around salmon, but there could be some incentive when we're discussing Grays Harbor fisheries with our tribal co-managers to just come right out with this challenge and be really clear with our co-managers that we want to fish in December, and then us as biologists can try to do that math now. So on that topic around December fisheries and protecting steelhead, I got to be really clear in case folks aren't aware, we end up with steelhead forecasts typically in October for the last few years. That's a real accelerated plan where we essentially stop counting steelhead reds in June, dry off our waders, get our right in the rain paper into the computer and start pushing that work with co-managers sooner. So that gets us to about an October steelhead forecast. So that's the constraint, is we don't know how many steelhead are coming back, but those have been around, recognize we're probably going to have a low steelhead forecast coming in next year. And maybe it'd be worth discussing that now. So that's why we put it on the board here. So that's all I have to say here. Again, I hope this slide doesn't cause any anxiety because it's really early in the process. Typically, we're not talking about fishery proposals right now, but we want to make sure folks know that that's kind of the next step. And then I think we're at a good place to answer questions here. I'm gonna let Leah, kind of the brains behind the operation for questions, take the mic, and then Marlene, I'll tee it up to you to lead that work.
Okay, everybody, just a reminder to raise your hand. There's a raise hand function at the bottom of your screen. Depending on the Zoom you are running, it might also be a reactions tab. It looks like a smiley face. And if you are on the phone, it is *5. It looks like our first hand is Dave. Dave, go ahead.
Hello. I
Hi,
have,
we can hear you.
I have a couple things here. On the Chinook numbers, all without tearing through my computer where I'm watching this. It's simply this, for the last 4 years, for whatever the reason, weather or otherwise, the Chinook had come in early, and if I remember, after looking at the numbers earlier, we were about 2,000 under escapement for fall Chinook last year. If the run hadn't been early and the nation had fished as they normally did, that number would have been way different. So my only thought on fall Chinook is we shouldn't be too overly optimistic here because they've been coming in and getting upriver before the nation can get at them. And that's been a controlling thing, the Chinook numbers. And if any of the last 4 years, those fish had come in late or right on time as they normally did over the years, our numbers would have been so bad that we've been screeching from heaven and back. So it's, I'm just saying this forecast for whatever it is, if these fish don't come in early, you're gonna have problems. Okay, and I guess then my next thought is December fishery. I realize we have a few steelhead around then. We might have had more early part of the run before the old days of Chambers Creek and Bolt. But right now, there are not many steelhead in the river in December, okay? And to this thing where the nation, when they fish, it's dead, okay? We can release particularly steelhead, and if you had to, some bait restrictions, simply because they're not salmon. They're all hardied up and everything else, and if they're handled correctly, and some people do not, but the mortality on the steelhead would be terribly low because there ain't any December steelhead like there was post-Bolt, because those programs are gone. And the only thing that comes close is the hybrid they call Van Winkle for Wainuchi mitigation, okay? Otherwise, our fish are steelhead or later. So to destroy the wreck season for Lake Coho, to protect steelhead, I'm not exactly certain that's even a rational approach, okay? Now, if you want to say that the Lake Coho numbers are in trouble, particularly the old January hooknose, I won't argue with you, but then you can use the catch and release if you have to, or even like a bait ban, whatever you have to do to reduce mortality. So I'm simply saying there's two different things right there that are all tangled up with the nation, that if things go all wrong or all right or whatever we've seen doesn't necessarily come to true. And also the wreck fishery, which bears fishing behind all the commercials, has always been going for November and December, where a lot of people fish. When they lose that, especially December, that's just not even reasonable, okay? I understand rules, but that rule is just plain silly because it's not based on anything that's accurate. And so for right now, I'll shut up then.
Thanks, Dave. And for our next hand, just going to remind folks, we are doing we're starting a 2-minute um, 2-minute length restriction for your comments, and then questions with one follow-up after that. Our next person is Larry. Larry, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for this is Larry Pryor. I've spoken or met with a number of you folks. So a couple of questions here on the Willapa Bay. I'm mostly because I fish out Willapa Bay. On the forecast for hatchery region, do you have a forecast for what harvest is going to look like? Secondly, I also wanted to ask about in those forecast numbers. I see that at Coho you use Ocean Age 3 estimates, but I'm assuming that those numbers that you did are based off of 2021 releases and 2020 brood, with 4-year 4-year age estimate. Is that correct? So, so what, do you have a harvest forecast here out of that? And then kind of where you use the 2021 releases on Chinook and 2020.
Hey, Larry.
I can start with the
Great.
about the coho modeling that you mentioned first. The Ocean Age 3, yes, that was done with the 2021 brood year fish for the hatchery fish. So I can confirm that. And for the forecast of how much will be harvest, I think I'm gonna pass that question along to, sound like James had feedback there.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and Larry, like Aaron said, your math is right there, the way you're thinking about it. And so everybody knows on this call, Larry, this is a great question. So first step here is forecasts. What kind of abundance do we think is coming down the line? And the next step, now that all that math is done, most of that math is done, we're going to go back to our offices and estimate impacts to each one of these stocks, hatchery and wild, based on the proposals we hear. So those harvest numbers that we're thinking about, those could change, right? Whether we go mark selective or not, which days of the commercial fishery are open, which aren't. So right now is really about forecasts. And then the next time we all meet, we'll be sharing information about harvest. So just that work hasn't been done yet, but appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Our next hand is from Bob. Bob, go ahead.
Hey guys, thanks. Regarding the Chehalis fishery, in this December issue we've had, I know it was 2 years ago. I think we extended the coho fishery through December 15th with pretty good creeling on there, and I believe that we didn't have any impacts or even encounters with steelhead through December 15th, if I'm correct. And so I would think it would be wise if we modeled, split the difference, because we talk about either December or the end of, or first of, or the end of November. Well, let's model in between, and let's look at December 15th, since we already showed that we could fish salmon in there with no impacts on steelhead. And then maybe if we're really concerned with that, if we have a 2 fish limit in there like we've had the last couple of years, maybe December 1st we go to a 1 fish limit. So you'll catch some fish, and people can go in there and catch those fish, but then they can get out of there a little quicker. And that would reduce our time on the water, which would reduce our chance of an impact of a steelhead. So just a thought that, hey, we could give them 15 more days, still give them an opportunity, but have a little concern for those steelhead. So that's just an idea I got. Thanks.
Hey, and Bob, I might jump in there. So we were taking notes here and we got your proposal down. Appreciate it. And so what I'm hearing overarching there is an interest in talking about steelhead here with our tribal co-managers and in public meetings here at North of Falcon, at least for that December period. So kind of support for that idea. And correct me if I'm wrong, but then if that is the case, I appreciate too a proposal that it is, accepts the idea that there is encounters with steelhead in December. And in some years, those can be significant. And then we do have to protect them. We do have management objectives that start, once we start impacting steelhead. So yeah, appreciate that proposal. We got it written down, and I think I understand it.
Yeah, if we could just meet somewhere in the middle on that and still have a fishery, but recognize that steelhead could be there, and we want to reduce those possible impacts, but still provide a salmon fishery that we know is robust and available. So thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Our next hand is from Garrett. Garrett, go ahead.
Hey there, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. Just commenting on Grace Harbor and the Chehalis. Obviously a long-term solution for our December closures is going to be to come to an agreement with the tribes on steelhead. I think for this year, I kind of like what Bob was saying about modeling like a through December 16th. And then, you know, even if we just model it for, say, one hatchery fish, that's a lot of times we're targeting a late run hatchery run in there anyways. So if we could model it for one hatchery fish through the 16th of December, and then that'll still give us a lot more impacts to use up earlier in the season when we pretty much know we're going to get a fishery. And yeah, I guess yeah, that December fishery is really important to a lot of the locals in the upper basin, specifically the main stem Chehalis and Skookumchuck. So if there's any way we can just tweak some stuff, come to some agreements with our co-managers on that, it'd be really awesome to get that at least the first half of December back. Like from Porter all the way up to Borst Park and Centralia. That's something a lot of locals have missed out on for a few years now. So it'd be awesome to get back to having that opportunity. So that's what I've got for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Garrett. Our next hand is from Francis. Francis, go ahead.
Okay, unmuted. Am I live?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, a couple of proposals. I would echo what the young man just said about December. Anytime we lose time in area, that is a kick in the crotch for the sport fleet. So please model through mid-December, model the one fish bag that keeps people on the water, extremely low impact on steelhead. And if there were fish left over to do it, you could model two fish. But you know, I think that's a very good compromise. Do it for one fish, either wild or hatchery. Let's move downriver. The rest of the main stem Chehalis up to December would be a two fish bag, two wild in the bag for coho. And I would propose a hatchery Chinook. We have a fishable Chinook run on here. I don't want to kill wild kings outright, but my gosh, someone hooks a hatchery fish while they're trying to get their two coho. Let them take that fish. No harm, no foul. Let's extend downriver, right into the bay, into the marine waters. Propose East Bay fishery September 16 through November 30, like we've always had. We never fish through November 30 because the weather gets bad. We're pretty much done the end of October. A few diehards will get in there in the first week or two of November if we get a weather window. I would propose a two fish bag, any two coho, and a hatchery king in the bag, please. Let's back up a little bit. North Bay. Let's put August 1 through September 15. Let's put a one fish bag in there. Fish has to be hatchery, period. Hatchery king, hatchery coho. It didn't look like there was enough. Was there enough? Was that hump tulips king forecast low? Or was that fishable, Mike?
It's fishable. As I ran through everything this year, it kind of looked like similar to what we had last year, maybe even a little bit more in river restriction, maybe a
Can we model it both ways to see if it fits?
oh, certainly, yeah.
Any one king or a hatchery coho. One fish bag. Get them in, get them out.
Yeah.
What else did I miss? Oh, Jax. Help me out here, Dave. Oh, he can't. He's muted. August 1 through September 15. I think that's a 6-week season. The jack fishery, like we've always had it. And we've gone around the block with this. I wish I could have Bill Osborne next to me here to help me out with the argument, but we are not counting those toward the escapement. They do have a biologic purpose in life. They help to ensure that in lean times that there are at least some males to fertilize what eggs are in there. But for the most part, if they're just gonna get surplused out, let these old guys get these jacks and let them take as many as they can. Why don't we just not put them on, well, we can't not put them on the card, but put a 12 fish limit on them. I don't know. I don't know if anyone wants to burn that many slots, but I think it's kind of silly to put a limit on jacks. And we'll take as many as you'll give us, okay? Did I get it all, Mike? Was that top to bottom?
You certainly covered pretty much every area, except
Okay.
maybe the upper Chehalis, if you wanted to.
Upper?
No, wait, I think your time has expired.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Francis.
Our next hand is from Marlisa. Marlisa, go ahead.
Hi, this is Marlisa, and I am hoping to get you to consider modeling some different things down here in the Willapa. There continues to be a lopsided distribution of natural origin Chinook impacts to the commercial fisheries down here. In 2024, to even the playing field, if we could just enforce the existing Willapa Bay policy that we crafted in 2015 to keep the nets out of the south end of the bay until after Labor Day and out of the bay until after September 15th in the north end of the bay, that would enhance our recreational fishing opportunities down here. With the constant early dip-ins that's being allowed, it removes those few early returning Chinook to the freshwater, where we got freshwater fishers just hoping to get a fish. And it also helps to enhance the marine fisheries, where for the last several years, it's been 7 to 8 trips per boat to catch a fish. So I'm hoping that when you are modeling and you are setting your seasons, that we're going to consider this kind of a change.
Thanks for your suggestions, Marlisa. I wanted to just take a moment to let you know that the commission did approve a new Willapa Bay salmon management policy in September of 2023. And it is no longer a part of the policy that boats are not operating in the southern part of the bay. And that's available on the website. If you want to email me, I can go ahead and send it to you.
I'd love to see the new policy, but regardless or not, I'd still like to see this type of modeling that's done to promote some type of meaningful recreational fisheries down here.
Thank you, Marlisa. Our next hand is from Larry. Larry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, that Francis sure sounded awful familiar, right? Probably talked to him before. I forgot to ask, for these projections, how comparable are they to 2023, 2022? And then lastly, as a comment, do you also do run timings? It seems to me that the run timings are beginning later and later. And then I hope do I get comment a little bit later too? I'll leave it at that. So how comparable is this to the previous projections here? And that run timing, do you do run timing also? Thanks.
Hey, Larry, I'll just jump in here because it's a big question, lots of little answers. And so I think what you saw on these slides that I think maybe, Marlene, can you nod your head? Are those online? Or we have these available online, yeah. So is that right, Marlene?
Sorry, yes, everything's available online. And we also sent out an email to everybody on the distribution list this afternoon with all the
awesome.
materials as well.
Thanks, Marlene. Yeah, so Larry, the slides you just saw, you can look through those online, but I think your question specifically about last year's forecast, you didn't see that on most of those slides. You saw last year's run size. So if you want to know species by river, by stock, I think the best thing to do is to reach out to Mike or Aaron directly and have, you know, a more specific discussion about which river you're interested in and how this year's forecast relates to last year's forecast. I think that'd be helpful, and it may stimulate a river specific proposal, a fishery proposal that's important to you, that you could just share in that way.
Well, my questions and comments are in regard to Willapa Bay and generally the bay fishery.
Yeah, I've got loads of data that I'd be happy to share with you and walk you through. So yeah, we could set up a time to call or email. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. Our next hand is from Dave. Dave, go ahead.
A couple things. I'd like to, having been the poor joker that had to dip out over 1,000 jacks in one night and dispose of them. I don't know what the limit on jacks should be, but as part of your daily, your 2 adults and 6 fish total, or however they do it, I don't even know why you have a limit on jacks, but it should be a heck of a lot more than 6, and it shouldn't be punched out where it takes you off where you're paying for like adult. Guy goes out and catch 6, and you don't have to fish too many days to, if you're good at it, to limit out on jacks. And those guys, there's only certain stretches of the river that you really fish it, and if you do it right and you know how to do it, you do well. But the thing about it is, I don't understand the limit, because it's not like they are in short supply, okay? My second thing I want to say, so everybody knows, is the Skookumchuck mitigation coho, when it was issue was resolved and there's 3 release sites working with the local community, a late time stock was used. And the reason for that is normally last year where they all shot up way up early was not normal, but normally the fish in large numbers that aren't colored don't come until the November rains. Okay. So, but they are still later timed. And so when you say no December fishery, you just took one heck of a shot at the upper basin above Porter. Okay. And if I wanted to dig up in records, I can show it. But when we brood stock, we corked that river side to side, and you do not get many coho above there until it rains at Porter. Okay. Below Porter, they can stack up, they stage up, but above Porter, they come with the rain. So these rules to protect steelhead, I understand it, but the lower basin and upper basin are like 2 different worlds. Okay. And so you really put the hit on the upper basin guys when you say December's out, because that's where their good fishing is, because they're all bright. They're not, you don't have a flock of reds in there. And so, and the other thing I'd like to say as a suggestion is, we got a problem on the Chehalis, and it's been growing, and it evolves around no single individual. It's just us people. When I had my little boat in the 80s, I would see 7 boats, if I seen that, in a day on the Satsop, maybe more on the Chehalis when they were plunking and stuff. And that was it. Nowadays, you need traffic lights below Fuller Hill. Okay, and that by circumstances, that's also where, because of the cool water, the fish start, and the way tidewater works, the fish stack up. So in looking at our regulations and stuff, we need at some point to understand that there's just getting to be a lot of us on the river fishing. And despite the Chehalis being the 2nd longest watershed in the state, it isn't the 2nd biggest, okay? And so these fish get stacked down tight, and the people do, and a lot of the problems with so-called unruly fisheries evolve out of that mob of people, okay? So I don't know the answer to the question. I'm just saying, in your guys' thought process, and understanding that the ever-growing number of people fishing here, is getting rather large, and there's not necessarily that much room. And if the fish come in and stack up early, you can see some substantial abuses just among people, okay? From grabbing the fish for his picture to using eggs, golf ball size eggs for fishing for jacks when they're not fishing for jacks, but it's actually legal. You got a lot of things in there. And I'm not saying do anything drastic, but there needs to be a conversation started with the public, and understanding is we got a traffic jam and it's getting worse. And sooner or later, we're gonna get ourselves in bind with the fish, and it's gonna affect our other fisheries. So this thing where people charge down and jump on the Chinook like they've been doing, well, there needs to be some thought of how we get away from that, how we moderate it, because we're not gonna have less people. Every time you mention Puget Sound getting another restriction, just add another 100 people here. And so somewhere along the line, we got to take a thought and try to figure it out before we get too deep into it. We can't get out of it. And that's my thought.
Thank you, Dave. Our next hand is from caller ending in 932. Go ahead. I have just prompted you to unmute.
This is Ross. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Ross.
Okay, thank you. I had some comments about the NEMA, where we could increase the egg take. There's surplus bucks, and so you should look at raising the limit from 2 adult Chinook to 3, but only if you have a max of 1 hen, and that would give people the opportunity to cut down on the surplus bucks that are sold and help out with that situation. I think we're going to have to be innovative and creative. Repeating the same things over and over again is not really helping us that much. The NEMA chum numbers are so lopsided. I have to make a suggestion. In other words, if there's 80,000 chum coming back, 1,700 hatchery chum, why on earth are we hatching chum? They take up a huge room in the NEMA hatchery. And both the last 2 years, there have been 2,000 chum in the hatchery they didn't need. They pushed them back out in the river, and they went up and did a stealth PHOS on everybody upstream, and they all went upstream. And so I would suggest you look at, let's quit hatching chum and hatch more Chinook in the NEMA hatchery. That will really help us a lot. Thoughts on that?
I would just say we're just taking notes here, and we got everything you said. So appreciate your comments.
Thank you. That would be innovative and creative. And, Albert Einstein's definition of insanity is we keep repeating the same thing and expecting different results, and we're not going to get different results without thinking out of the box. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. Okay, it's at that time of the meeting where we are out of fresh hands. So just a reminder to those who haven't commented or are on the fence, to raise your hand is star 5. And our next caller is Francis. Francis, go ahead.
Mike was wrong. I did leave one out. Sorry, didn't mean to leave the hump tulips out of it, but it looks like similar numbers to last year. So I'd probably roll over that same fishery we had for Chinook and coho like we had last year, but I'm not sure what the date that we switched was for wild coho conservation. But at some point when the Chinook retention ends, we drop the bag down to 1 hatchery coho for wild coho conservation. Mike, do you remember the day that we switched that? Was it
Typically it's in November 1st.
November 1. Okay, that's what I would propose. Okay. So basically last year's reg, right? Lowering hand.
This. And that was our last hand for right now. So just a reminder, the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen, or *5, star. Oh my gosh, I said the wrong thing. It's *9. I was doing the one for Teams. My apologies. And we have a hand from Gabe. Gabe, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I don't have a whole lot to add other than I'm supportive of the department continuing to have discussions with Quinault on Steelhead, and obviously keeping that or getting that December coho fishery back. It's really important for the industry and really important for those communities down there in that area to have opportunity that time of year. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabe. Our next hand is from Bob. Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add that if we're concerned about Chinook stocks in there, if that's a limiting factor and we're concerned about those, you might think about just going to no eggs, no bait at all for that aspect of it. Cohos, you can catch them on everything. You don't need to use bait to catch them, but you will catch a far greater number of Chinooks when using eggs. It will kind of maybe take away from your jack fishery a little bit because they like to eat them, but it would protect a lot of those Chinooks. And if that's a limiting factor, might be something we look at. So.
Thank you, Bob. Our next hand is from Larry. Larry, go ahead.
Me again, I was going to say this till later, but the gentleman about NEMA talking about raising production. So a couple reasons I asked you how the forecast looked to past years. So we know what it looks like, and that, you know, it's going to look about the same for the next 3 years. You did a little bit more in the way of releases here in 2022. I think you were up to 8 million something or other. But either way, in 2021, you released 8,277,612 fall Chinook. Now I'm talking about Willapa Bay here, and that you're projecting 27,327. So there's not anything we can do for the next few years, but that means that that a whole bunch of those fish are not returning. If the SAR is a 0.33%, which if you take 100, if they're 100%, that means that 99.67% of all the fish, the Chinook you released, did not return to the bay. Okay, and you'll hear me say this over and over. So my point is that you need to talk about improving your efficiencies on your fall Chinook programs out of your hatcheries, not necessarily improving, more releases and all that. I mean, you can release 20 million fish out of there, and some of those are bad. So some of you folks have heard me talk about this before, and I've specifically talked to the number of hatchery managers about it too, and they're working on it. But because of the layers, man. But so anyway, that you'll hear me talk about this on and on and on again. It's not about increasing production. It's about improving efficiencies in your fall Chinook programs. What I'll always hear from you folks is it's ocean impact. That's the big thing that changes things. Well, I say Priest Rapids Hatchery, 400 river miles up on 7.5 million Chinook released, got 51,000 back to the rack this year. They've made some substantial changes here. You guys need to look at making improvement changes in, what the gentleman said before, doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting different results. You got to start looking at different changes in your hatchery management programs, because 99.67% of the fish that are not returning to the bay is not good. And then we can't do anything about that for another 3 years, but, start working on the hatchery managers. I've met with a lot of them. They want to do a better and better job, but to some extent, in now and next year, that's, going to be my position. How are we doing, on the SARs and on the returns here? I mean, what are we doing to improve those adult returns back? So that's my comment. You'll hear it again next time. You'll hear it again next time. Thanks.
Hey, Larry, I'd appreciate replying to you on that. I appreciate all the thoughtful feedback there. So in terms of forecasts, I know you really want to understand how these forecasts relate to last. And I could just say broadly, so you're not having to dig through a bunch of documents, you should still hang out with us and we'll talk through all the details. But we're seeing forecasts are really similar to last year's forecasts. And then the run, and that comes Willapa Bay, Chinook, and Coho are quite similar to last year's forecast. But you can compare in those graphs the actual run size we observed, and there's some ups and some downs. In terms of hatchery releases, of course, we're talking about forecasts here. And so we are writing down feedback that some folks are saying maybe release more. Others are saying, release smarter, improve your program. So all these notes are being taken. But because we're at the forecast meeting, I do want to highlight, and Aaron's the expert on this who ran all these models. We are noticing in Willapa Bay, and this isn't a 1-year thing, multiple years in a row now, we've seen that in some years when we release more fish, specifically Chinook and Willapa Bay, we get lower survival rates than in years when we release fewer. And in some cases, releasing more fish has led to fewer adults returning. So I'm sort of nodding my head with your comments. They make a lot of sense to me that we should look close at these hatchery programs in Willapa Bay specifically and see if there's tweaks we can make that aren't just releasing more, because we have seen, I would just want to be really clear, the data is quite clear that releasing more Chinook in Willapa Bay has in some cases resulted in fewer adults coming back. So just appreciate your feedback. We're looking closer at these patterns, and I agree with smarter approach to hatchery releases may result in more adults coming back. So
it's not just hatchery releases. There's a lot of things, from water quality, broodstock management, feed strategies, release strategies, anti-predation, a lot of different things. Those guys are pretty tuned into things, but there's a lot of things that they need some help on too. In that. But it's like you said, so I'm glad to hear that. I hear that from the other, from the hatchery managers too. They want to do better jobs. Some of it, you guys have that M&E program going now that's helping. Where we're at. Some of it they truthfully, I got to feel they didn't know. But I've said, what can we do to help? Here, there's not anything we can do about what the previous releases. What can we do to help on these? And there's a number of things. It's not just releasing less fish, but ultimately it is, ultimately, particularly with what your guidelines are on with natural region, there's a lot of things. One of my other notes here was about the regional fisheries enhancement groups too, but that's a whole nother question here. So anyway, so just in general, doing a better job. If you look at that Priest Rapids program, they've made a lot of changes, and that they have their returns, they actually exceeded their natural returns here. Anyway, I forwarded that. They have an M&E report that's great on some of the things that they did, and a lot of it's broodstock management, and managing to a stronger fish, more likely to survive, a lot of different things. But, there's a lot of other things you can do. Water quality, when I stop in the hatcheries, I ask about, what your water hardness is, and I never get an answer. In some of the presentations we did, I don't know if you Jesse, that SSFO stuff that they're starting to do trials on here. But anyway, how water hardness affects smoltification, a lot of different things, and how all that changes. But that's just one little thing of a lot of things you could be doing.
Larry, let's keep this conversation going. The people here, and I think it's really important that we don't just stop here talking about this. So let's commit to that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Larry.
And you got a lot of great people working on a lot of things too.
I would agree with that.
Yep.
Thanks.
Everybody I've met, they're all wanting to do a better job. It's somewhere gets stuck in the layers, So, as you all know, that's your.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Larry. Our next hand is from Marlisa. Marlisa, go ahead.
Hi, this is Marlisa again. I wanted to make a couple of proposals that had to do with gear restrictions and changes, not just with recreational fishing, but also with commercial fishing. You know, I live down here in Pacific County, and when the commercial fishers are in the Willapa River, especially in South Bend, I hear nothing but complaints that you know, the nets stretch bank to bank just about, and that they're often anchored in the mud on the far side. So they're set netting and not gill netting. They're not drifting. And so just by chance, I happened to run across an old proposal that was back in the 1940s from the South Bend paper. And there was a proposal that limited the length of gill netting nets, the length of the net in proportion to the river where they're fishing. And so I would like to propose that we do a commercial net length change, that they can be no longer than 50% of the width of the river in South Bend, there where they're fishing in the Willapa River. So a lot of recreational fishers that would like to put a boat in can't get in because there's nothing but nets in there, and the nets are so far across the river and entangled in the river that there's very little fish getting through. So even if the boat's put in above that area, there's still not much getting through. So I'd like to actually see that as an official proposal. And then, although I took James Losey, his comment that these are just out there, that we're not acting on it. But on the retention rules, where all landed fish count against the limit, I can't support that, because, you know, in freshwater, sometimes we encounter an unmarked salmon, and the hooking mortality is very low in freshwater, really low for the guys that are fishing correctly, especially on Chinook, where they almost always bite. It's in the upper part of the jaw. It's easy to remove that fish and set them back in the water where they live. And so I can't support that all landed fish count against the limit. And I just want to make a comment about that. I don't think that's fair. And I also think that the existing rule, where as long as the fish is hooked in front of the gill plate, is good and should stand that way. But I could support eliminating jigging, because nothing good seems to come of jigging in freshwater where the holes are shallow, and bad actors really are using that in a bad way. So thank you.
Thank you, Marlisa. Our next hand is from, I think it's Ross's hand. Ross, go ahead.
Hello.
Hey,
This
we
is
hear you.
Ross. Yes, I had not heard about but I'm not surprised about the negative returns. Sometimes you release more Chinook and you get less back. And I'm the leader of the Willapa Basin Ecosystem Review Team. We did a review of the ecology in the bay a few years back, and it has really gone downhill, mainly due to the spraying of eelgrass. And so I'm not surprised. In other words, the carrying capacity of the bay is very highly reduced. And that's a warning. That's a big warning signal that, especially for the wild Chinook that have to smolt in there. Some of them don't go across the bar until October. Okay, and we have a habitat problem. The department has never responded to our report. And really, that's evidence that it's there, that you put more fish in and you get less back. They're starving in the bay. It's obvious. I did not know that. Makes the phone call worthwhile. That's the straightforward explanation as to why is a bay which used to produce way more fish can't anymore. And we really need to press to get an answer to that report and get serious about bringing back eelgrass where it's been removed. It's really sad, and I hate hearing that, but there's a simple explanation, and if you look at our Weber report, you'll see it. We've just lost habitat terribly in the bay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. Our next hand is from Francis. Francis, go ahead.
Unmute. I'd like to address two things that were mentioned. I don't want to belabor the discussion about the hatchery and things they do great at Priest compared to at Willapa Bay hatcheries is really apples and oranges. You know, they're working from a wild brood stock from the healthiest run of wild Chinook on the planet. There is not a healthier stock of Chinook than what comes off of the 55 miles of free-flowing Hanford Reach. It's the only self-sustaining, really thriving population of Chinook we have left from BC all the way to Alaska. In fact, I'm up here in Alaska right now stumping for Kenai Kings, and all of Alaska's king stocks are just in the toilet. The other thing about that is, you know, they're using a lot of wild brood to make those fitter fish at Priest. We really don't have that. We have our wild population. We can't even meet our poultry escapement goals for wild recovery, even though we still want to put 20% impact on them on our objectives. When 2015, 9 years ago, we decided the best number for that was 14, but that's another subject. That ship has sailed. So I'll leave that and then just revisit a couple of the comments about bad players in congested cool water where fish are staging and giant gobs of eggs being used for adult Chinook, with people say, oh, we're fishing for jacks. You might consider out of the box thinking here. If someone's going to chuck bait, that you give them a hook size restriction. I don't think you can use a number 1 or number 2 or number 4 because every hook manufacturer has their idiosyncrasies of how big these things are. There is no consistency from one brand to the next or one manufacturer to the next. So put a hook size restriction if you want to use bait, single, barbless, point to shank, no greater than, you guys pick the number. I think a 1/4 inch might be too small, a 1/2 inch is too big. So I'll start with 3/8 and then you guys can adjust from there. I think that's a reasonable hook size to catch jacks up to, 23 inches. Chances are if you hook a big king, if you're really fishing for jacks, he's going to break your 6-pound leader, or he's going to straighten your little bitty trout hook. Okay, so I think the mortality would be exceedingly low with that kind of snare. So out of the box thinking, if we can. All right, that's all I have. Okay, cool.
Thank you, Francis. And our last hand is from Dave. Dave, go ahead.
I just have actually I have a request to Mike. Could you take a shot at before when we go into, you always send the preseason forecast model out for everybody and I spread it all over and everybody gets it. But, could you take a shot at before we get into the season setting thing where you could actually kind of we call late December 1st without getting into a 25-minute dissertation on exactly what the history of that December 1st date is. Could you take a shot at showing next when we start into it the number of spawners for coho in December that we call lates and the number of spawners in January and later? Because frankly, I understand everybody's concerned about steelhead, but I have a little bit more of heartburn about the January coho. Okay, the true lates they go later, and the true lates really don't start showing up to around Christmas time. The early December fish, we call them Turkey Day fish. I'm really old, so go back. So I would just like to know if you could get that information, because when you're talking shutting down like December 15th, well, I understand that thought. The other side of the coin is there ain't very many more between December 15th to January 1. And there ain't that many Lake Coho, but they do start showing. There's a mix thing in there that I'd like to be able to look at if it's and others too, because if there is a stock of fish in this basin, it's in serious deep crap. It is the native Lake Coho, the true lake, not that December hybrid thing that runs up and down the Satson. And I
Yeah.
just have that information if you could.
I can share with you some of the data. I mean, we've looked at it and we've got a lot of data that we could put that we have already together. And I can get in a little more detail with you. But yeah, I'll work on that.
I'd appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Dave. And that was our last hand for the night. So just a reminder for those on the phone, *9, unlike what I told you earlier. And just a reminder of the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen. Looks like we have a hand up from Bill. Bill, go ahead. Oh, actually, he disappeared. His hand lowered. So our next hand is from Rich. Rich, go ahead.
I'll unmute you there. Hey, first of all, we all have difficult times to try to work through all the problems with the fisheries and the salmon steelhead. But first off, I'd like to thank you for everything you guys are doing. While I don't agree with a lot of it, I appreciate you guys taking this time. And then I'd like to also comment on Francis and Robert's comments on the Chehalis River. I'm not going to reiterate those, but I am totally behind those. I'm a big fisherman in Willapa Bay, Grays Harbor, so those are a couple of the major concerns. I have spoken with the manager of the Fort Creek Fish Hatchery in regards to the Chinook situation and a lot of other things regarding Willapa Bay. But anyway, I will be following this, and I appreciate everything, everybody's comments and everything you guys do.
Thank you, Rich. Our next hand is from Bill. Bill, go ahead. I have prompted you to unmute. It looks like you're unmuted now.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Bill.
It's absolutely amazing to me after 67 years of attending North of Falcon meetings where they never talked about jacks at all. I've heard more talks about jacks tonight, and this is the main thing I used to go to all the meetings for, was to push for the jack fishery. I fished jacks out in Chehalis for about 50 years, and I know where the jacks are caught, and they're primarily around the pump houses once they were built for the nuke plant to the mouth of the Satsop. Yeah, they catch a few out in the bay, but the fishery is in that stretch. I'll go from South Monty to Fuller Hill. The bait that is used is eggs, so I'm opposed when anybody mentions going to another way to catch jack, because I've tried them all. I've tried beads, I've tried jigs, I've tried spinners, and every now and then you catch one. But if you take eggs out of the jack fishery, you're going to ruin that fishery. I did take the time to go out and in the last year, Bingham, Satsop Springs, and the Skookumchuck, those are the jacks that we fish on. There were 4,650 jacks. that were done away with, that sportsmen should have had a chance to, if the limit was raised. I tried last year to get the jack limit raised, and it fell on deaf ears. And I don't understand the resistance. I understand, because Mike has explained it in the past. There might be some impact fishing jack. You might hook a Chinook. I'm here to tell you, with 6 and 8 and 10 pound leaders, you're not gonna hold any Chinook. We just need to modernize this jack fishery, give them to the old timers and the people and the kids. I love to see kids fish jacks. And you're gonna kill them at the hatchery anyway. Give them to the people that want them. On the coho, probably nobody fishes more than what I do on the lake because of my occupation. And I've been retired since '97, and that's all I do is fish. I fish coho and the Wainuchi and the Chehalis and on the Satsop, and primarily the ones that Dave Hamilton was talking about, the lakes where there used to be lots of them, they aren't there anymore. And so I would back him up on protection of the lake coho. Lakes to me are November and December and January, and Dave and I go round and round about that. But do something about the jack fishery if you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Our next and last hand is from Francis. Francis, go ahead.
Oh my God, I get the last word? Okay. Hey, Bill, I had to do that for you because I didn't know you were in the audience, Bill, but you know I'm always looking out for you. I'd also like to mention to all of the old managers here who may be listening in the wings that may not know this, but one of the staunchest advocates for conservation and a great numbers guy that I have extremely soft spot for, passed away recently, and that is Mr. John Campbell. And I thought you guys should know that because he gave a lot to this process. And with that, I'll close.
Thank you, Francis. And that was our last hand. Just a reminder for folks, *9 on your phone, the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen. It looks like that might be it for tonight, Marlene. Oh, we have the last hand from Larry. Larry, go ahead.
So thanks again for the time. I just wanted to reiterate again, there was a comment here a little bit ago. So through this last couple of years, I've got to know, John Larson and Logan and Nick and Marlene. I've talked to her a couple times. So all the people I've met, John Loverick, Rob Allen, and on, all are trying and wanting to do a great job here. And a lot of them are fishermen. Want to see the process get better and better here. And everybody I've met so far have been great people wanting to do a good job. We just need to turn them loose. Thanks.
Hey, Larry, thanks for that. All those people that you just mentioned, all of them are in this team. So it's exciting to hear you say that. And we work side by side with them each day. So we'll make sure and let them know. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Larry. Our next hand, we have a couple more that popped up, is Rich. Rich, go ahead.
Yeah, just one last comment. I haven't been involved in this process for a long time. I'm a avid sports fisherman, but I really appreciate Francis and everybody else that has done so much to try to keep these fisheries going. And with that, all in.
Thank you, Rich. And one last hand from Dave. Dave, go ahead.
This is kind of like I said, we all should remember John Campbell. Hell of a guy. And he helped the agency substantially years back because he was an environmental guy for his employer. He tore models apart like nobody you've ever seen. And he, unlike me, managed never to really lose his temper and always be polite. So something be said for a gentleman like Mr. John. And the other thing is, Mr. Losi and Mike, what you guys might want to consider is this. The hook thing and everything that's not a bad idea, but here's one last thing. When it comes to hooking mortalities and there's people using bait, you guys have a secret weapon you've never utilized. It's a simple rule. If you see a fin on a fish, you're using bait and you're not supposed to have it. You cannot touch it with a net. You cannot touch it with anything. You reach over there and cut the leader. The minute you take out of people touching the fish, the mortality goes way down. And by the way, if a guy's running heavy gear and stuff, he's not going to get very many jacks. So basically what you would be doing is protecting the adult Chinook, and all of the cost of fishing. Leaders and one hook are the cheapest part of it. You can't drive to the river for as much as they are. So you might consider that rule when you're fishing bait certain times of the year, when you know that risk is there. You can't net it, you can't touch it. You just reach over the side and cut the leader. And as long as you don't touch that fish, unless it's got the hook got into the gills and bleeding, that mortality just goes way, way, way down. It seemed to be a simple way to resolve the conflict there without really penalizing one side or the other. It's just my thoughts, something to consider.
Thank you, Dave. And we have a hand from Ross. Ross, go ahead.
This is Ross. I'd just like to add my condolences and appreciation for John Campbell. What a trooper he was. What a good guy to communicate with. Really miss him, and I really would like to honor him. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. And that looks like our last hand for the night. Marlene, take it away.
Thank you, Leah. And thank you everybody out there who joined us tonight. It's really great to hear from all of you and see the enthusiasm for the fisheries on the coast. Really appreciate the tribute to John Campbell. So thank you for starting that off, Francis. And if people want to get in touch, if you're not on our distribution list, it's here on the slide. For Willapa Bay, it's Willapa Bay at dfw.wa.gov. And Grace Harbor at wdfw.wa.gov. You can also submit links electronically at the link there for North of Falcon related public comments. And we will look forward to seeing you on Friday and again at our fisheries discussion meeting next month. And I hope everybody has a wonderful evening. Thank you.